Hi there, welcome to the archives. In this episode, I'm doing an audio recording from a blog post that I originally posted on my website on October the 13th of 2020. It's called Decolonize, Whiteness. Content warnings. So this post deals with various forms of physical, emotional, psychological, racial violence, colonialism, patriarchy, and public shaming. Content and trigger warnings are to be considered. Please proceed with care. Disengage or take breaks if you need to. In Angry White Men, published in 2013, white American sociologist Michael Kimmel said that right-wing radio programs like The Savage Nation and on-air personalities like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity reached 8.25 million listeners each week, were heard on more than 600 stations, reaching weekly audiences of more than 20 million followers. That's a direct quote from Kimmel. You can find it on page 38 of the book. Limbaugh, Hannity, and Savage Nation are popular because they generate white rage as a way to discharge their fears and project their shames onto others. Most notably, Black and brown people. Surprise, surprise. I research emotions and trauma, shame and fear specifically. As an expert and shame researcher, I can vouch with Michael Kimmel that this is true. There is empirical, anecdotal, and scientific evidence found in the scholarly literature to also suggest this as well. What Kimmel argues makes sense to me and others. He's not making it up, and neither am I. Kimmel insists that, and this is a quote, through the use of overgeneralizations, sensationalism, inaccurate information, ad hominem attacks, and partial truths, that's a direct quote from page 32 to 33, angry white men have continued to turn other white men and women against Black and brown people. These male listeners who endorse anti-Black white supremacist rhetoric are typically supported by the white women in their lives, like their sisters, their wives, their mothers, their daughters, etc. But very rarely do white women, even those that identify as feminists, very rarely do they create space to welcome critical analysis of their role in white supremacy. Most do not even want to hear about it. They can barely say white supremacy at all. In an interview with Time, Black Caribbean American writer Jamaica Kincaid said, I think one of the terrible things that feminism never addressed is the moral situation. We are so interested in equality. We want to do the things that men do, but so many of the things that men do are repulsive and shouldn't be done at all. Here, Kincaid reminds us that on our quest for women's liberation, we need to be attentive to what bell hooks and others identify as patriarchy has no gender. Anyone could adopt and perpetuate patriarchy, white feminists included, me included. But white women are not immune to patriarchal imprints, though some claim to vehemently oppose it. But I'm not a racist, is the response you will typically hear, to which I and many others say, but your mother and father probably are, and if not, their mother or father, or. For those that have ancestry tracing back to European colonial powers such as Portugal, England, France, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, and Germany, it is very likely that you have an anti-Black racist in your family, if not many, if not you. The Portuguese and British were particularly oppressive and harmful in Ghana, where I was born. Ghana was the first Black sub-Saharan African country to gain its independence from the British in 1957. As a geography nerd, I share with pleasure that Ghana is situated in West Africa, Togo is to the east, and Ivory Coast on the west. We share borders with Burkina Faso to the north, and shorelines leading to the Gulf of Guinea can be found to the south. It is estimated that 29.46 million plus people live in the region. As early as 800 AD, the ancient kingdom of Ghana ruled for roughly 1,000 years before its collapse and disappearance during the middle of the 13th century. This comes from what historian Robert Egerton said in 1995. According to Egerton, the Ashanti Empire was opulent. Its wealth and riches astonished even white Europeans and Arab traders. Black Ashanti kings and queen mothers held positions of power. The area was populated with lush green forests and was rich in gold. Egerton asserts that during this time, Ghana was known by Arab traders as the land of gold. For this reason, the region would later be called the Gold Coast by the Portuguese, who upon arrival were so impressed by the flecks of gold that sparkled in the streams. And this is all a direct quote from Robert Egerton, 1995, and you can find that on page 14. According to Passionton Oben, Ghanaians made first contact with the Portuguese colonizers, who were the first to arrive on our shores. By 1685, the French, British, Spanish, Italians, Germans, Dutch, and Danish colonists and missionaries would soon follow to conquer and colonize much of Africa, as well as other parts of the global south, including India, the Caribbean, and the West Indies. In Ghana, the British posed the most threat, but the Portuguese did their damage too. Robert Egerton argues that initially the Portuguese relied on, and I quote, peaceful trade. However, by 1575, they had shifted to a more forceful and violent approach, claiming, and this is a direct quote, the conversion of these barbarians will not be attained by love, end quote. If you are Portuguese or British, or if you have ancestors who are, those are some of the stories of your people. Somewhere along the line, most white people can lay claim to some form of racism if they go back far enough in their family history. But reality and chances are, you probably don't have to go that far back at all. As far back as today will likely assess your racist status. I said what I said because it is a well-known fact that anti-Black racism is that pervasive. It even seeps into racialized communities of color. Not even I could escape it. I have to check my own internalized anti-Blackness daily in order to choose decolonization as a way forward. And I am a Black, African, Akan, Ashanti woman reclaiming my indigenous tribal identities. I still do this work to decolonize. So white people, how are you not? It makes no sense to me at all. It should not be on me and other Black and Indigenous peoples alone to do this intellectual, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and affective labor to decolonize. More white people need to do it as well. But most don't and won't. Do you even know what decolonization means? It is not far-fetched to assume that most white people are racist. They hate to hear it. No one wants to be called a racist. Mostly everything on earth is racist at this point. The police, our school systems, our healthcare systems, the judicial system, etc. Where in this world can Black people live full and free and whole lives? On a good day, When my memory cooperates with me, I can identify over 90% of the world's countries and sovereign nations. I can recognize a vast majority of the world's flags and name almost all of the capitals on earth. And I still have yet to find one place that grants and permits for Black liberation. Not one. Not even in Africa are Black people truly free. This is a conversation around institutionalized racism that movements like Black Lives Matter and people like Angela Davis, Robert Maynard, Miriam Kaba, and Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor are demanding that white communities have right now. Because racism has been institutionalized as completely rational and even justifiable. And at the very least, since the 14th century and beyond. When stereotypes of Black people as lazy, as fraudulent and demonic, barbaric, primitive, evil, and bad emerged. These tropes have been around since the inception of the enslavement of Black African peoples. I am not even white, but in learning more about the history of my people and learning that we have been involved in various wars against other tribes, as well as the British, and that we have also participated in indentured slavery against other tribes, even selling some of our own to white Europeans. And coming into this Ashanti history, I had to and continue to do the deep work to interrogate what these historical sites of violence have meant for me. How has such violence continued to show up intergenerationally, as well as genetically? I've had to ask members of the Ghanaian, Akan, and Ashanti community to consider what it means for us to have normalized so much violence historically and today. Just as I interrogate any narcissistic templates within me, I need for us all to consider cultural narcissism and how it gets in the way of us showing up for one another. These are uncomfortable conversations that require some level of consequence, heavy labor, and maybe even suffering. I am a Black African Canadian woman, and I have suffered for pushing these conversations forward. So have other Black men and women. Some have been killed, heavily surveillanced, and withheld from living their best lives. You will too, although never to the same extent that we have been persecuted. Please still do your work anyway. Because believe us when we say that Black women are tired. We will no longer carry what is yours. Our load is more than enough. The reality is, white men and women really struggle to balance power equitably when given it. So often, Black and brown homes are criticized and framed as violent and to blame for what others perceive as, quote unquote, Black people's demise. Black mothers in particular get misconstrued in violent and negative ways that white women never are. The white nuclear family in Europe and North America, if not globally, is represented exactly how we frame white people, as pure and loving, innocent and mild-mannered, gentle even, vanilla in all their ways, and void of vagrancy and shame. Black and brown families, however, are painted as dysfunctional. We are told repeatedly that Native and Indigenous communities have some sort of monopoly on alcoholism and vagrancy in general. South Asian communities are framed as the only ones dealing with femicide by way of honor killings of women and girls. We are sold the message that East Asian communities, specifically Chinese communities, are the assumed face of infanticide and supposedly kill more girl children than any other country in the world. And over, we are led to believe that Black people are the most inherently violent, most tragic, and the laziest criminals draining social and financial services. The Black mother in particular is blamed for much of the Black community's downfall, as was discussed by Bell Hooks, Melissa Harris Perry, Feminista Jones, and others. These stereotypes are presented and accepted as known facts, when in fact they're not true at all. But if these communities are more pervasive, but if these circumstances are more pervasive in Black and Brown communities, which they're not, it is typically because of the failure of the state. For instance, we can think of settler colonialism, residential school systems, the 60s scoop, slavery, the role of redlining and intergenerational poverty in the Black community in America, or one-child policies in China. Difficult socioeconomic conditions exist across all communities, irrespective of race, meaning that they are also true for white communities. With the exception of quote-unquote white trash and trailer trash stereotypes of poor, blue-collar, working-class white people, a stereotype which tends to be reclaimed with pride and supposedly not shame. For example, the show The Trailer Park Boys. There are no such stereotypes of white people that negatively impact white people or frame them as anything other than right and pure, clean and prideful. Very rarely are white parents constructed as abusive and unsafe or ever involved in child protective services. It is assumed that white homes are a sort of promised land the Black and Brown people are to model after. And yet we know this simply is not true. White people have their issues as well. The reality is that abuse of power and control dynamics are also found and used in white homes. Research shows that shame in particular was used in British households as a form of punishment. I study and do shame research. This is what the literature suggests. It was said that Western Europeans, British colonialists specifically, were some of the harshest when using shame. This comes from Peter Stearns, 2017. These same Europeans, according to Stearns, brought the practice of public shaming with them to colonial North America, where shame was primarily studied in New England. Anthropologist Peter Stearns shares that for the first half of the 19th century in North America, shame was productive for maintaining social order and decorum, adding that the connection between shame and social order was particularly beneficial before the importation of prisons from Europe to America. And I've talked about this in previous blogs and episodes as well too. In Europe, individuals could have their hands and ears chopped off, their hair shaved, anything to mark them as publicly shameful. The Romans and Protestants overemphasized shame as a form of social control, according to Stearns. Caregivers and guardians in particular relied on shame as a form of correction and as a useful disciplinary tool, often in front of other people. In homes, shame was used prominently as familial discipline meant to keep children in order. Educators and school administrators also relied heavily on shame, according to Stearns. Some of the first signs of shame appear as pedagogical and disciplinary framework in the education system as early as ancient Egypt. And I get this from Peter Stearns. In Europe and North America, dunce caps were given to disobedient students as a form of punishment. Grading and marking rubrics rooted in competition were also used to shame students who received poor evaluations. This is all from Stern, 2017. American schools would refuse to denounce shame-based practices until after World War II, when self-esteem movements were introduced and a shift to more positive reinforcements were instituted. Again, all of this research comes from Stern's 2017. I've also will share the work cited below. These are some of the research data coming out of shame research. So in addressing white feminists and shame, I have to raise this double standard. In my research, I use clinical psychologist Paula Kaplan to ask that white mothers raising white children consider the idea of disrupting what Kaplan calls the good mother myth and the bad mother myth. It is urgent that white feminists who parent do away with the binary. For all of us, please just sit in that heavy work. This introspection and self-reflection will suck. That I can promise you. Do it anyway. I do. I am not a mother, so white mothers get extra salty, the feminists especially. As feminists, we fight hard to push back against these narratives that frame women as nurturing or as bad mothers. So I understand. But I do want to parent someday. And so already, as a Black woman, I have to grapple with these themes. I already ask myself difficult questions that send me into distress, sometimes complicating my mental illness. This is in part because shame is a difficult emotion to work with and connected to mental illnesses such as depression. Shame is painful and sometimes physically brutal. Shame is so painful that some Japanese cultures have made reference to it as an energetic force that crushes, injures, and soils. This is from Stern's 2017. And because it is so difficult to manage, is why I especially need more white women to interrogate their shame, white mothers included. Mom shame is a real thing. I see mothers shamed online incessantly, Black women especially. Fathers do not have as much pressure, nor are they accountable in the same way. Even I struggle with this in my personal life. Paula Kaplan addresses these discrepancies rooted in sexism and misogyny. But because mom shame is real, is the very reason why I have to raise these topics as a shame researcher. Mom shows up in our culture, including popular North American culture, as well as in the literature on shame. So I have to ask, what is happening in white homes that results in mass violence against Black and non-Black racialized people? We need to all interrogate what white children are being taught in their homes and ponder why particular histories are being erased and kept from them, including their own. I do not raise these conversations to upset white women, though they still take it personally anyway. I raise them because the personal is political. How I show up in my home is in line with how I show up publicly. Even when I perform as an awesome know-it-all feminist. This is my research. This is my life work. I also ask Black mothers to consider these same cycles of shame that shame keeps us locked into. I leave you with this. Challenges with mediating power implicate white women who identify as feminists, parenting in chaotic and dysfunctional homes, similar to those of Black and brown women globally. Whether you want to admit it or not, no one is immune to the challenges that come with parenting or white supremacy. Psychologist Dr. Shefali Tasberi their work addresses this very topic, and she provides great tips on conscious parenting. Go check her out, and others who identify healthy coping mechanisms that support all parents. If this resonates, please pass it along and share it with others. If it doesn't, that's okay too. Like others, I and my words are not meant for everyone. If it is for you, please consider making a donation to my PayPal at DArchives. I am also on Buy Me a Coffee at DArchives. Thanks for stopping by. Until next time, in solidarity.